Happy Wednesday! You're listening to Mama Murdered a Podcast. I'm your host, AB.
And this week on Mama Murdered a Podcast, we're covering a mysterious death that was followed by a pretty botched investigation on a case that we may never know the answers to. This week, we're talking about the case of Tamla Horsford. So strap in and get cozy because this case is wild. So, without further ado, let's get it. Tamla Horsford was born on October 10th, 1978, and she was born and raised in the Caribbean up until 1989, when Tamla and her parents uprooted their life to move to the States, where they settled in the Bronx. Tamla would eventually relocate to Florida, which is where she would later meet her husband, and she would go on to be married to this same man for the next 16 years. Tamla's husband was a man by the name of Leander Horsford, who was better known to his friends as just Lee, so that's what we're going to call him for the remainder of this episode. Tamla and Lee had a beautiful life together, and according to Tamla's husband, Lee, Tamla was the kind of person who loved everybody. She never met a stranger, and Tamla and Lee would go on to have 5 boys together before they would eventually move and relocate from Florida to Georgia. So Tamla, Lee, and their 5 boys settled in Cumming, Georgia. And I have 2 boys. I cannot even try to imagine having 5. So shout out to all y'all moms out there that have more than 2 boys, because y'all the real MVPs. But Tamla was kicking mom ass and taking names. She was one of those rock star moms that we all kind of envy, but we love anyways. She was at every football game, every school event, and she never missed a beat. Tamla also had a stepdaughter, and it was Lee's oldest daughter from a previous relationship, and she was kind of grown and out of the house already. So Tamla had been there for this stepdaughter since she was really young, and they had a really close, normal mother-daughter relationship. But Tamla's stepdaughter didn't make the move to Cumming, Georgia with Tamla, Lee, and their 5 boys because she was grown and she was starting her own life, which included the fact that she was about to make Tamla and Lee grandparents for the first time. And Tamla was super excited about having a new baby and being a grandma, which, a grandchild doesn't sound crazy when you already have 5 boys, and their kids ranged in age from 4 to 14. So her job as a mom was far from over, and she was still, really excited to do the grandparent thing. Lee had gotten a new job opportunity in Georgia, which is why the family decided to make the move from Florida to Georgia to start with. All 5 of the Horsford boys were really big into football, and as a girl who's always lived in a small country town, I can tell you football is a lifestyle, not a sport or a hobby. It is a way of life. And that was no different for all 5 of the Horsford boys. They all excelled in football, and Tamla and Lee were always right there on the sidelines cheering their kids on. Lee says that Tamla would run up and down the ball field with a megaphone type of deal. And when the ref would make a bad call or when one of the kids would get discouraged, Tamla would just yell, can't stop greatness. He said that was just kind of her thing. That was her, motto that she lived by. And it seemed like they were literally the perfect all-American family. There is not one single thing where I could find that somebody had something negative to say about Tamla. Literally everything I read said that she loved being a football mom and that she could she could befriend anybody. I also saw in a lot of places that Tamla was the kind of person who was, really organized, and she was extremely easy to get along with and be around. So, the opposite of me, but that's fine. Tamla made friends easily, also the opposite of me. So, the move to Georgia just brought, more friends for Tamla and Lee. And on November 3rd, 2018, Tamla had plans for an adult sleepover, which are the kind of plans that I always want to make as an adult, but I either A, don't have enough friends to go through with it, or B, never actually followed through with these plans, even if I did have enough friends, because I like my own bed and my own husband too much to make and keep these kind of plans. But this sleepover was actually a birthday celebration for one of Tamla's, acquaintances. They weren't exactly friends, but it was a woman by the name of Jean, and it's spelled like Jean, so I'm not sure why she pronounces it like Jean, but she does. So, John Myers, it was her 45th birthday, and Tamla and John had met and become friends because their kids played football together. Now, this, sleepover / birthday party was going to be at John's house, where it would be John, Tamla, and quite a few other women. Tamla knew a few of the women that would be at this party, but other women she had only met like once or twice. She didn't really know them very well, like she more or less knew of them. Tamla had actually only just met and became friends with John recently before the sleepover/birthday bash. And most of the other women there, she'd only met once or twice before, and she didn't, like I said, she didn't really know them well. And when I say that Tamla was that kind of rock star mom, I mean that she really was a rock star mom. Before she ever left to go to this sleepover birthday party thing, Tamla made sure that her kids and her husband were fed, and she even went so far as to make them a breakfast casserole to heat up the next morning, since she assumed that she would be home sometime after breakfast. So she seriously made sure that her husband and kids were completely taken care of before she ever went out for a night for herself to cut loose with no kids. And even though this should have been a time of celebration, not having kids around, Tamla wasn't really that excited about having to go to this birthday bash, but she also didn't want any of the women to feel like some type of way if she didn't go. So Tamla's husband, Lee, had kind of canceled plans that he had originally had for the night in order to be able to stay home with the boys so that Tamla could go out. Because he was a good husband and he knew that his wife didn't take nearly enough time for herself. So it wasn't like this was something that she couldn't wait to do or like something that she had been waiting on and looking forward to. She wasn't really very into going. She was just a good person, so she went anyways. The women had planned to eat, drink, and watch the LSU versus Alabama game and just kind of relax. And I hate that I even have to mention this, but I feel like it's a pretty big part of this case. And if it's not, it's at least talked about a lot in this case. Tamla was a black woman, and she was actually the only black person at this entire party that night. And I know that it seems insignificant, but Cumming, Georgia, and Georgia in general, have some pretty gnarly racial crimes that have taken place over the years. And as of what I could find to date, only 7.28% of Cumming, Georgia was black in 2018. So this is very much a predominantly white community. And even though this was supposed to be like a women's only night, there were still 2 men at the party. The men that were in attendance that night on the birthday bash was a man by the name of Jose. And Jose was Jean's boyfriend. And not that it really matters, but I just thought it was kind of interesting. Jean was celebrating her 45th birthday, and her boyfriend Jose was only 27 at the time. So, get it, girl. It was John's birthday and her house, so her boyfriend was there. But it wasn't just Jose. His friend Thomas was also there. And Thomas was actually another one of the husbands to the women that were at the sleepover. And it seems like Jose and Thomas had kind of planned to go out and kind of do their own thing that night together. But then when it came time, neither one of the men really felt up to going, and they just told the women that they would stay, out of their way for the night. They would just hang out in the basement in the theater room, because they have a theater room, and they would just stay there while the women had, free range over the rest of the house. So they weren't originally supposed to be in the house that night, but they ended up staying and hanging out downstairs anyways. The 2 men did come up from the basement, and they grabbed some food while all the women were sitting around eating dinner. The party was set to start at about 7 that evening, but Tamla was a little later than some of the other people getting there, probably because she had 5 kids and made breakfast and dinner for the next morning before she left out. But Tamla had also stopped on the way to the sleepover and gotten an imported bottle of tequila imported from Mexico as a gift for Jean for her birthday. And she stopped and got this bottle, on her way to the party. And when she showed up, she was wearing a white onesie pajama set with puppy print patterns covering them. The women had a blast that night. They ate some gumbo, they drank, and they played some board games somewhere between the 10 p.m. hour. Tamla called Lee to let him know that she was having a blast, and Lee says that when he talked to Tamla that she was in high spirits and she sounded fine. Tamla even video called her stepdaughter just to show her off and brag about becoming a grandma. And oh, look at her baby bump, which is the most wholesome thing I've ever heard. So now let's remember that bottle of tequila that Tamla had stopped and gotten for Jean as a birthday gift. John later says that she didn't take the gift from Tamla because the smell of it made her want to, quote unquote, throw up in her mouth, which is gross, but you're also an adult. Just say thank you and re-gift it like a normal adult would. You don't have to be rude or nasty about it. But this particular bottle of tequila was one of Tamla's favorite imported tequilas, and she figured since John wasn't going to drink it, she might as well. I'm like, why the hell not? And it seems like all the other women kind of passed around this bottle while Tamla was outside smoking a cigarette, and they all kind of collectively decided that they weren't going to be drinking anything out of that bottle of tequila. Apparently it smelled really bad. So essentially, Tamla would be the only one drinking out of this bottle of tequila that she'd brought as a gift for her friend John. And while almost everybody was drinking that night, Tamla was from the Caribbean, and her husband Lee says that if Tamla was good at one thing, it was handling her alcohol. Like, there had been another woman at the party that night named Jessica that had gotten kind of sloppy drunk and had to be carried to bed by some of the other women, which is fine because that's why they were all sleeping over, so they didn't have to drink and then drive home. But everybody agreed that night that Tamla was completely fine, and even though she had drank a pretty good amount, she wasn't slurring, she wasn't stumbling, and that if they had to describe Tamla, it would have been that she was like buzzed or tipsy at best. Tamla was also the only person at the party that smoked cigarettes, and this was made like abundantly clear throughout everybody's recollection of what happened that night. Like they almost overdo that she was the only smoker. Tamla called her husband Lee a few times throughout the night, and even though at one point Tamla had kind of wanted to go home and go to sleep, aside from that, Lee said that she was in high spirits, which just seemed to be the kind of person that she was in general. Like she was always trying to make the best out of a situation, but that she wasn't drunk by any means and that she was completely coherent and alert and functioning at her normal level, and he would know this, he is her husband. Like, if I'm drunk, my husband can point it out, and he'll put me on blast so fast. Like, you just know when your significant other is, like, highly intoxicated. So, obviously, she was in a good mood from what everybody that knew Tamla best said, that when they talked to her that night, she seemed fine. And I mentioned that Tamla had said that she maybe wanted to go home that night, and although a lot of the women did have their husbands drop them off, Tamla had driven herself. So if she really wanted to leave, she probably could have and would have done so. And Lee says with a fierce confidence that no matter how much Tamla would have drank that night, she would have made it home, and that she would have made it home safely. And he kind of prefaces this by saying that they were both from, the islands, and they'd kind of grown up drinking. And again, he said this with his whole ass chest. He meant what he said. He honestly believes in his heart that if Tamla would have driven herself home that night, she would have made it home fine. Some of the ladies, left the night when their husbands picked them up, like they hadn't all planned to spend the night. And everybody basically agrees on the events of the night. Tamla was a smoker, so she'd gone out a few times throughout the night to smoke a cigarette. And at one point, Tamla was outside smoking pot with John's aunt who lived with them. So Madeline is John's aunt, and they lived together. Once John saw the two women were smoking pot, she kind of got upset and asked them to stop, which is fine, it's her house. But she'd asked them to stop because John's boyfriend, Jose, was actually a pretrial court officer for Forsyth County, which is the same county that Tamla and her family lived in. So I'm assuming that the way John was looking at it was like, hey, he is an officer of the courts, and you probably shouldn't be smoking pot around him, which is going to be interesting when we learn a little more about Jose, though. So just keep that in mind. Tamla and John's aunt only hit the weed like once or twice while they were outside. It wasn't a big deal, allegedly. And supposedly, Tamla and John's aunt just kind of put it out and went on about their night. Like it wasn't a thing. Tamla FaceTimed her kids and her husband to kind of tell everybody good night before all the women called it a night. That, they were kind of planning to head to bed. And at about 10:30, two of the women were heading out. Their husbands had come and picked them up to take them home for the night, and these particular women hadn't been planning on spending the night from the jump. Like, they had always planned to go home, and everybody knew it. So everybody's starting to get tired. They're ready to go to bed. Most of the women had a sleeping partner for that night, except for Tamla. Tamla hadn't really been that close with anybody at the party, except for Stacy, and she was already spoken for as far as a sleeping partner goes. So some of the women that were closer were going to share a bed, and the reason that Stacy was spoken for as far as a sleeping partner goes is because her husband was Thomas, the one that had been hanging out with Jose. So her husband was there, of course she would sleep with him. Even though they crashed the all-women's party, we're going to skip that fact and just keep going. Because if the men hadn't crashed the party, Tamla and Stacy would have been able to sleep in the same bed, and Tamla might not feel some sort of way about it. Because Stacy had actually brought in her phone, and she kind of brought it into where Tamla was going to be sleeping, and she left it with Tamla and told her that their phones could sleep together, even if they weren't physically sleeping in the same bed, which is super weird to me, but, I mean, I guess, whatever. So according to everybody at the party, once everybody was kind of ready to lay down, Tamla had kind of asked a few of them, like, hey, do you want to stay up and, like, hang out with me a little bit longer? Like, I never get to have, like, a girls' night out. And, you know, I really don't want to call it a night so soon. Like, who knows how long it'll be before she gets to go out again. But all of the women seemed to be pretty set on going to bed. So, I mean, that's what they did. And at one point, after everybody had kind of laid down already, Jose had gone back to the basement/theater area of the house to grab his phone charger since he'd crashed the all-women's party. And when he'd gone to get his phone charger, Tamla was still up with one of the women named Bridget in the kitchen hanging out. And Bridget had pretty bad anxiety, so she knew she wasn't going to be able to sleep at somebody else's house. So Bridget had called her husband to come and get her, and she was just kind of hanging out with Tamla in the kitchen, waiting on her husband when Jose came down from his room to get his phone from his phone charger from the basement. So Tamla and Bridget were the only ones left up, and since everyone else had kind of bailed on staying up with Tamla, according to Bridget, Tamla was eating a bowl of gumbo, and then she had planned to go outside and smoke after she finished eating, and she, I guess, kind of said, like, this would be her last cigarette of the night before she went to lay it down for the night. So Bridget's husband gets there, and she and Tamla hug, and Bridget goes home with her husband. So from here, we'd assume that Tamla would have probably finished her bowl of gumbo, went outside to smoke one more cigarette, then came back inside the house to go to bed for the night. Like I said, this is what we would assume would happen. But what actually happened after Bridget left is still a mystery to this day. Because John's house was equipped with a security system. This security system not only kept track of, but it also alerted John's phone anytime that any external doors were open or closed. So the doors inside the house, like the bedroom doors, the bathroom doors, those wouldn't cause the security system to send an alert to John's phone. But the front door, back door, garage door, any door that led to the outside of the house would send an alert to John on her phone, and there would be like a record of what time the doors were open and closed. And this system would let John know exactly which door had been opened, for how long it had been opened, and the date and time that it was opened. And it was at 1:47 a.m. that the security system logged the door being opened and closed, which would have presumably been when Bridget was leaving to go home when her husband came to pick her up. And it was only about 2 minutes later at 1:49 a.m. that the back door of John's house opened, and it was logged, as being opened. And then another log was made just 1 minute later, and the door was shut at 1:50 a.m. So we can kind of only assume that this would have been Tamla going outside to smoke a cigarette after she'd finished eating her bowl of gumbo. This would have been after Bridget had left to go home with her husband. And can we all just collectively agree that Tamla eating something would have sobered her up just a little bit? Like, if she was a little too intoxicated, gumbo would have helped sober her up some, which only seems important later on in this case and during the investigation. There was another door that was being opened and or shut again at 4:10 a.m. And this time it was the front door that had been opened, which is when a woman named Marcy claims that she left John's house to go home to get ready for her new job at the Coach department store. Marcy claimed that she had set her alarm so that she could get up, go home, shower, and get dressed for her new job, which would have only been her second day on the job, but oddly enough, we find out that Marcy's shift wasn't actually set to start until 10 a.m. that morning. So why was she leaving at 4:10 a.m.? Like, 4 a.m. seems a lot of early to be leaving to get ready for a shift that doesn't start for another, 6 hours. But hey, I'm just a stay-at-home mom with a True Crime podcast. What do I know about a real job? The next person to leave John's house that morning was a woman by the name of Paula, and Paula left John's house around 7:30 a.m. After Paula left, the next ones that were supposedly leaving the house were Stacy and her husband Thomas. Stacy and Thomas had left John's house that morning somewhere between 8 and 8:30 a.m. So when Stacy and Thomas leave, Stacy went to get her phone that she had left to sleep with Tamla because, we all love a sleepover with our friend's phone. Anyways, Stacy went in and saw her phone was still beside Tamla's phone, and Stacy was like, she just kind of remembered being happy that Tamla had decided to spend the night after all, because she had been wanting to leave the night before. So everything still seems pretty normal up to this point, and it only starts getting kind of sketchy when Jean's aunt, who lived with her, remember, Jean's aunt had been the one that Tamla had supposedly been smoking pot with the night before. And, her name was Madeline. So Madeline was Jean's aunt. She woke up, and she said she'd woken up somewhere between 8 and 8:30 also, and that she'd just kind of laid in bed until she was ready to get up and make some coffee. So when Madeline got up to make coffee, she headed into the kitchen, and Madeline happened to kind of look out the window, and that's when she saw Tamla. Tamla seemed to be laying in the yard, face down and unresponsive, still wearing her white PJs with the small black puppy paw prints on them. And you would think that if you saw someone outside face down in the yard and not moving, that you would go check on them and then automatically call 911, right? Well, no, not Madeline. Instead, she drops to her knees and starts praying. And she even makes it a point to say that she didn't even start the coffee. She just dropped to her knees and started praying instead. So Madeline didn't go check on Tamla. She didn't call 911, and she did not start life-saving measures on Tamla. She just prayed, because that'll help. That'll fix her. And when Tamla didn't just jump up and start running around the yard, happy to be alive and happy that the prayers worked, Madeline goes up to Jean and Jose's room. And Madeline first said that when she first got to Jean and Jose's room that she thought she'd heard water running, like maybe the couple had been in the shower. She knocked. When they didn't answer, she figured she wouldn't interrupt them because the woman laying in the yard unresponsive can wait, right? So she just went back to check and see if Tamla was still laying in the yard not moving. And shocker, she was. She was still laying in the yard, unresponsive, face down. That's crazy. Madeline goes back to Jean and Jose's room, and she knocks again, and they tell her to come in. When Madeline gets into Jean and Jose's room, she tells John that she needs to talk to Jose only. And she just needs to talk to him for a minute, but only Jose, which is weird. So naturally, Jean's like, hey, I'm going to need to know what's wrong. This is my house. Like, Jose doesn't even live here. What the hell's going on? And this is when John's aunt, Madeline, tells John, quote, your friend from the islands is laying in the backyard and she's not moving. But then, later on after the questioning starts, John and Jose said that they hadn't been taking a shower and that Madeline knocking on the door is actually what had woken them up. So Madeline later, backtracks and she's like, oh, you know what? That may not have been water that I heard. I might have just been tripping. That's so weird. Which, come on now. The stories already are not aligning. Jose says he throws his clothes on and follows Madeline down the stairs to see what all the fuss is about. Jean follows right behind her boyfriend and her live-in aunt. And I guess Jean kind of asks, as they're all going downstairs, hey, should I probably call 911? Which is yeah, that's probably a good idea. Let's do that. The 911 call came in at 8:59 a.m., and I'm going to play it here. Because you're going to need to hear it, and you're going to need to listen.
Forsyth County 911.
Hi, yes, I need an ambulance and the police to my home.
What's the address?
4450 Woodlet Court.
4450 Woodlake?
Woodlet.
Woodlet, okay. All right, 4450 Woodlet Court. What is your name?
My name is John Myers, Jeanne.
Okay, and your phone number is 609?
Yes.
Okay, what's going on?
We had people over last night when we were drinking. Most of us went to bed. One of them stayed on the balcony. She was drinking, and we just went outside, and she's laying face down in the backyard. It looks like I'm guessing maybe she fell off the balcony, but she's stiff.
Okay, is she breathing?
I don't know if she's face down.
Okay, how old is she?
41. Here, hold on.
Hey, this is Jose Pereira.
Hey, have y'all checked to see if she's breathing?
She's not moving one bit. She's not breathing. I just tried to assess her, touch her. She's completely face down in the yard. She is stiff.
Okay. Do you know if she, do you see any blood or anything where she... Are you there?
I am.
Okay.
I'm sorry I was outside.
It's okay. I'm not sure what happened to line there for a second. Do you see any blood or anything to where, from where she fell?
I don't know if I should move her over. I mean, she's completely face down.
Okay. I mean, can you just check and see if she's breathing? If she's not breathing and you know she's gone, then just leave her where she's at. If she... Okay.
1 minute. I'm completely not sure.
Okay, and that's the only blood that you would see?
That's what I can see without moving her over. I haven't seen her face.
Do you know if she was suicidal at all?
I have no clue. I've met her one other time. Like my girlfriend said, people were over last night. She was her birthday party. We're not the woman that we believe to be deceased, but it's my girlfriend's birthday party. Instead of having everybody go out, she had everyone stay in. And she was the last one I saw before everybody. I mean, everybody was typically put off to bed. She was the last one in the kitchen. She was just either waiting around for a ride or waiting until the morning.
Okay. How far is the where she would have fell from? How far is the deck from the ground?
I would probably say maybe 20 feet.
Okay.
20 feet from where your feet would be on the railing. The railing itself is maybe 3.5, 4 feet.
Okay. And what is her name?
I know her name. We call her Tam. I'm assuming that's short for Tammy or Tamla.
Was she there with anyone else?
Her name is Tam Horsford, Horsford, so the black female. I don't believe anybody was. My girlfriend has cameras here on the back deck that we can check.
Okay.
That I think would have caught the incident if she fell from here. Again, I don't know. It's hard to say if she fell from the deck or if she was already downstairs. She was the only smoker here, and I'm sorry. That's a lot of information.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. So you think she's possibly out there smoking?
Yeah, she was the only smoker. I mean, I'm on the back deck right now, and cigarettes, lighter, that type of thing are out here. I'm just trying to see where on her wrist kind of came from.
Okay. All right. Are all the people that were there last night, are they still at your house?
Okay. Okay, there are 4 people that were here last night that are no longer here.
Okay. And they just left this morning, or they leave last night?
Do you know roughly what time each of them left? Like, they completely over on the footage. We can check. She's got an alarm system that gives alerts when the doors are open on her phone.
Okay.
But I think the last time that I personally saw Tam was probably about 1 in the morning before I'd gone upstairs to bed.
Okay.
And at that point, she was the only one in the kitchen. I know.
Okay. Let me see where everybody is. I have one deputy that's about to pull into your subdivision. So I'll stay on the phone with you just for a minute. Is this going to be around back? Is that the way he needs to go?
Right. So when he pulls up to the residence, there will be One car in the street, 4 in the downtown.
And does he need to come and go through the house, or does he need to walk around the back?
They can go around to the side. I'm going to grab my shoes, and then I'll direct them when they get here. It'll be easier for them because she's laying in the yard down, basically on the patio downstairs.
Okay. I have one that should be pulling up. Do you see him outside?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll let you go then.
All right, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Bye.
So I'm sure that you heard the, long pause where it just kind of went silent. That was actually a lot longer. I cut a lot of that out so that you weren't just having to listen to silence, but I'm not sure if that was redacted or if, maybe Jose muted the phone, or I'm not sure what happened. So this 911 call came in at 8:59 a.m., and they're already assuming what happened. Maybe she fell off the balcony. And the way that Jose gets on the line and just introduces himself like he's somebody, I hate it. Anyways, another thing is Jose's acting like he's not trained to perform life-saving measures. As a person who works in the court system, you would think that he would be. He also says during the 911 call at one point that Tamla's body is stiff and that she isn't breathing whatsoever. But then again, later on when the 911 dispatcher asks if he's sure that Tamla isn't breathing, this time he says something like, I can't really tell. Oh, okay, cool. But just a second ago, you were damn near positive that she wasn't breathing. Now you can't tell? And you still don't think to perform life-saving measures. This entire 911 call chaps my ass, but something that really chapped my ass about it was that the 911 dispatcher made a huge mistake here when she asked if maybe Tamla was suicidal. That's just putting, untrue or at the very least assuming ideas into people's heads who found this scene. That's a big no. You're not. She's kind of leading them to believe, or at least planting the idea, that maybe this was suicidal. Now, we're just throwing out random ideas now. The police are supposed to investigate the scene and then make a determination. And then the way Jose answers the question about how far he thinks that maybe it would have been for Tamla to fall from the balcony, and he says maybe 20 feet from the railing if her feet would have been on the railing. Again, it's almost like that seed that Tamla might have been suicidal had already been planted, and now we're just watering it and watching it grow into something that it's probably not. At no point during this 911 call did Jose or presumably anybody else perform life-saving measures on Tamla, which is yet another thing wrong with this 911 call. This dispatcher tells Jose that if there's no hope for Tamla and that she's not breathing and she can't be saved, then just kind of not to worry about it, which again is not her job or Jose's. You're supposed to perform life-saving measures under almost any circumstance. That way there's no question as to if the right thing was done or not to save somebody's life. There are very, 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 very few circumstances where life-saving measures are not supposed to be performed until emergency personnel get there. And this ain't it. This isn't one of those circumstances. And again, Jose tells the dispatcher that John's house had security cameras and a security system, and that the cameras should have caught whatever happened. Then he says that they'll get the camera system pulled up and check it for them, which I'm screaming at my computer like I'm watching a bad acting scary movie, Because I'm like, no, Jose, that's actually the police's job. They'll check the cameras. They're trained and know what to look for. But instead, Jose's going to check the cameras and make sure that nothing fishy's going on. And then, then maybe he'll hand the security system and the footage over to the police, which never happens, by the way, but we'll get there. The officers were dispatched at 9 a.m. and they arrived on the scene where Tamla was still laying in the yard less than 10 minutes later at 9:07 a.m. So not a bad response time. A few different agencies and investigative agents were called out. And of course, some of the people that showed up on the scene saw their good buddy Jose and they're like, hey, bud, what's up? funny seeing you here. Looks like y'all got this under control, so we're going to head out. Because EMS was never called to the scene. And even though the coroner's office was sent out to Jean's address, the police investigators are actually the ones that, pronounced Tamla dead, called the time of death for her. That's not their job, and that's also not how that works. They're supposed to be either a coroner or medical examiner, and they're the ones that call the time of death, not the damn police officers. And I'm already kind of pissed off because this case just pisses me off, but let's get even more pissed because the way that Jean and Jose and everyone else at the party claimed that Tamla's body was laying was a little bit different than how her body was actually found when first responders arrived on the scene, though. The people that were on the 911 call claimed that Tamla was face down on the ground and that her head wasn't turned to either side, so her nose and mouth would have been face down in the dirt. They also say that Tamla was face down with her arms laying next to her on both sides, kind of straight down, and that Tamla's palms were up, facing up. So kind of you think about the way you would lay on your stomach for a massage or something. They also say that her legs were laying straight, kind of like she had just face planted the ground, almost like she didn't try to catch her fall at all. Maybe she didn't see the fall coming. But when first responders got on the scene, they said that Tamla's body was face down like everyone had claimed, but that her arms were bent, that one of Tamla's arms were bent, her left arm was bent at the elbow away from her body, and the other arm was kind of laying to her side, which would have indicated that she was trying to brace her fall, she did know that the fall was coming. Kind of the exact opposite of what everybody else claims that they saw. And the people that were at Jean's before the first responders got there even say that they don't know how that could have been documented wrong, but that it was something they'll never forget, the way that they saw her body laying. It seems like Jose kind of relayed to the officers that there were a few cuts or lacerations on Tamla's body, even going so far as to say that one of the cuts on Tamla's arms or wrist, that it was there and that he doesn't know if maybe it was self-inflicted. Which is just a weird thing to say, I feel like. Or at least, that isn't something that I would say if I found someone dead in my backyard that I presumed was dead. No matter how well I did or didn't know them, but that's just me, I guess. People even kind of wonder and speculate if maybe the Forsyth County Police wouldn't have moved Tamla's body to fit their narrative that Tamla fell from the balcony. That would have made for a much faster, much easier investigation if she would have just fallen. And I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that I've seen a lot of people who are wondering the same thing. This would have made their jobs a lot easier, which is true. And it would have made their investigation a lot quicker and a lot easier if Tamla would have just fallen, and it would have been an open and shut case. But there were more than just one or two lacerations on Tamla's body, though. She had a few smaller marks, cuts on her hands and wrist. And when I say small, I mean less than 1 inch cuts or abrasions. But Tamla also had marks and abrasions on her legs and on her face. And I just wonder how those marks, scrapes, cuts, whatever, how they would have gotten there if Tamla just slipped off the balcony or even if she did jump from the balcony. I feel like you wouldn't have very many cuts and bruises from a 2-story balcony into the grass. And with the racist shit that happens in Forsyth County, the stuff that's happened before, them moving the body wouldn't have been the worst thing that this town's ever done. While investigators were in the yard checking out the crime scene, everyone was still at the house, and they were told to go into a room and to stay there. There wasn't an officer that went with them, and there was, no supervision of any kind from anyone. Not that they're children or anything, and not to say that they're children or anything, but that would mean that if something fishy was going on, that everyone at that party knew about, then this would have given everybody ample time to get their story straight and to make sure that everybody knew what to say to match everybody else's story. Jean was asked to call everyone who had been at the party and get them back to her house so that police could question everybody. And Tamla's body was taken to the coroner's office, so everybody that had already left Jean's house was called back. And they were all put in a separate room from where the people who had already been there when police and first responders got there. They did separate the two groups of people from each other, but only in 2 separate rooms. So they're still able to talk to each other and get most of their story straight. But remember when I said that Stacy and her husband Thomas left somewhere between 8 and 8:30? Right, okay. And then remember how I also said that Madeline got up somewhere around the same time, right? Okay, you with me? So if Madeline could see Tamla laying in the yard from inside while she was trying to make coffee, how in the actual fuck did Stacy and Thomas leave to go home and not see a single thing that would throw up a red flag? I just don't see how that works. The crime scene was documented so poorly in this case that I think a 7-year-old who watches too much CSI could have probably done a better job than these officers on this scene did, documenting the crime. Now, something else that's weird is that Jose told the first responding officers on the scene that he had been woken up by Madeline knocking on the bedroom door where he and John were still asleep, that he threw his clothes on right away and went to the balcony where Tamla would have supposedly fallen from. But Madeline had already told Jose and John both that Tamla was in the yard. She told them that when she went in and woke him up. But either way, so he puts his clothes on and he immediately goes to the balcony. But that when he got to the balcony, he saw an unlit cigarette and a lighter laying on the balcony floor. Jose says that he picked the cigarette and the lighter up and he moved them both to a small fire pit that was close by. The brand of cigarettes matched the brand of cigarettes that Tamla smokes. But later on in an incident report, an officer writes that Jose told him that he was cleaning up the next morning and that's when he found one loose cigarette and a lighter. But Jose had already said that Madeline had woken him and John up when she was knocking at the door to tell him about Tamla. Now he's saying that they were already up and cleaning up from the party the night before. So, I'm sorry, Jose, but I thought you were asleep up until the point that Madeline woke you up to tell you about Tamla's body. See, now I'm just confused. So then Jose kind of backtracked again on himself and he says that he found the cigarette and lighter before he found Tamla's body, or he wouldn't have touched or moved the cigarettes and lighter if he would have known that Tamla was dead in the yard. But he literally says before this that Madeline woke him up to tell him that Tamla was in the yard unresponsive. So which one is it? Like, were they up cleaning? Or were they asleep? We'll probably never know. And a few of the other partygoers said that they were all already up cleaning from the night, cleaning up from the night before. But in the first series of events that was told, Madeline was the only one awake. She saw Tamla and went to wake Jean and Jose up. But now in this version of events, everybody's already up and cleaning. And I've told y'all once, and I'll tell y'all again, I'm not a math whiz. I don't math. But the math here just ain't mathing. Something ain't adding up. Something ain't right, y'all. So with that already being said, let's talk a little bit about how Lee found out that his wife was now dead, super unexpectedly, because this will also piss you off. There was an officer at the Horsford door, and one of Tamla and Lee's sons went to open the door. When he opened the door, the officer asked to speak with Lee. So Tamla's son goes to grab his dad, and when Lee gets to the door, the officer asks if his name's Lee. Lee answers in the way that I feel like a lot of people would answer, and Lee just asked the officer, what is this pertaining to? Lee claims that the officer completely ignored the question, and the officer just asked again if his name was Lee. And they go back and forth with, what is this pertaining to? Is your name Lee? Well, what is this pertaining to? Well, is your name Lee? And Lee finally just says, yes, his name's Lee. He's like, actually, no, it's Leander, but yeah, what the fuck? What do you need? And at this point, the officers must have been either super annoyed or just aggravated with Lee, because the officer just flatly tells Lee that it's about his wife and that she's deceased. Lee asks what happened and how they're so sure that his wife's dead. Lee's then told that Tamla either tripped or had fallen from the second-story balcony at Jean's house. Lee is not allowed to go to Jean's house to view his wife's body and was not able to go to the scene of the crime where his wife's alleged murder happened. Lee still to this day has a hard time believing that his wife would have tripped and or fallen over a balcony to her death. But these officers went out to tell Lee about his wife and her quote-unquote accident, but they told Lee her cause of death before Tamla's autopsy was ever done or completed. So these officers really shouldn't have been telling Lee how his wife had died at this point, because it was all purely speculation. The autopsy hadn't been done, so there was no cause of death legally or officially determined. And the police had a few theories before they landed on the one that they're sticking with to this day on what happened to Tamla. And at first they thought maybe Tamla could have tripped over some rocks in the grass, maybe a flower bed type of deal that, rocks around the flower bed, whatever. And maybe she had tripped on those and fallen and somehow gotten killed, which doesn't really make a lot of sense because of the multiple blunt force trauma that we later find out about when they finally do the autopsy. And you would think a trip and a fall wouldn't leave very many cuts or injuries, especially, like I said, in the grass. So the next theory was that maybe Tamla had just fallen from the balcony, which A, seems hard to do because there is a whole ass balcony rail that you would have to get over in order to fall from a balcony. And B, Tamla would have likely had a lot more injuries if she'd fallen over the balcony rail into her death. But even falling from the balcony wouldn't explain the multiple blunt force trauma. She landed in the grass, not on the gravel, not on the concrete, or something hard like that. And you would think that the injuries would match an accidental fall if that's what happened. Like, I don't know, maybe some kind of injury to Tamla's face, her nose, or hell, even her teeth. But that wasn't the case. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a country bumpkin with a true crime obsession, so we're going to keep going. When the autopsy was finally done, though, Tamla's toxicology report found that her blood alcohol level was found to be listed at a .238, which is like well over 3 times the legal limit. And, I mean, that was kind of the whole reason that everybody spent the night, because they knew they were going to be drinking. So that's not a big surprise. Also, according to her husband, Tamla could hold her liquor, and he's watched her dance after drinking like half a bottle of tequila in 6-inch heels and be completely fine doing that. So even 3 times the legal limit probably wasn't that bad for somebody that can hold their liquor. So along with the amount of alcohol that was found in Tamla's body, they also found marijuana and Xanax in Tamla's system. But Tamla didn't have a prescription for Xanax, and she wasn't known for taking Xanax on any sort of regular or even sporadic basis. And the Xanax had to have been taken almost immediately before Tamla's death because it wasn't even metabolized in her liver yet, which would mean that the Xanax had to have been taken very, 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 very shortly before her death. After the toxicology report and the autopsy was done, Tamla's cause of death was ruled as an accident, and the manner of death was listed as multiple blunt force injuries. Also listing that there are no notable injuries to indicate foul play in Tamla's death, which we'll get to. There were also no pictures taken during Tamla's autopsy, which is how you would normally, corroborate your findings as a medical examiner. So he would say, oh, there's a small laceration here and here. Okay, cool. But the pictures taken during the autopsy are the proof to back up what the medical examiner is saying. So now we just have to kind of take his word on all these findings, which isn't at all how that's supposed to work, but apparently that isn't a thing in this case. So later on during the questioning of all of these people that were at the party, we find out that Bridget does get prescribed Xanax, though she says she never gave Tamla any Xanax. And she claims that she never gives anybody her medication. But we later find there are text messages that police were able to pull from Bridget's phone of another woman at the party asking Bridget if she can have some more Xanax because it had really helped the times before that she had given them to her. So now we know for a fact that Bridget has given her prescription pills to people who don't have a prescription for it. So that's a lie. But the amount of Xanax in Tamla's system and the way that her liver hadn't metabolized the Xanax yet makes me believe in my heart that Tamla was drugged with the Xanax. Now, why someone would want or need to drug Tamla, I still don't know the answer to that question. But that's really the only way that I can make it, I can explain it away to myself. Because if Tamla had a history of taking anything, Lee would have known and he would have told police about it. It seems like Lee and Tamla didn't hide things from each other and that they were pretty open and honest about, basically anything. So I feel like he would know. My husband would know if I started taking something that I didn't have a prescription for because I would tell him. Because I'm a grown-ass woman and I don't have to hide shit from anybody. So something else that I can't get over in this case is the fact that there are no pictures taken during the autopsy. None of her body, none of her injuries, which is autopsy tech 101, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'm not an autopsy tech or anything, but I would think that taking pictures during your autopsy would be something that they would teach you literally on day one. But again, we don't have them, and there's a lot of stuff left to the imagination with that. So you gotta be wondering what they ever found on the security system that was installed at Jean's house. Remember, Jose told the 911 dispatcher that they'd look over all the footage and they'd let the officers know if they found anything of substance. Well, funny enough, that security system magically did not record anything that night. The cameras were an Arlo camera system. Jean says that the cameras held a battery pack that you'd charge when they die, which is the exact same way that the cameras at my house are. These cameras are set up to alert Jean on her phone anytime the cameras went off. So these cameras work like they hold a charge for a few weeks and then you pop out a battery pack and charge it through the day while somebody's home. John claims that she couldn't find the charger and that she didn't worry about recharging them, which kind of defeats the entire purpose of even having a camera system set up if you're not going to keep it charged. And then later on, there's an email that Jean sent to the investigative officer saying that she had accidentally deleted the footage from that night, but that she's not tech savvy, so she doesn't know how to recover it. But she does give her login information and password to the officer so that hopefully he can figure out how to recover the deleted footage. So funny that that's the only night that was deleted. That is the only footage that was deleted. Accidentally. Allegedly. Supposedly, of course. So as many times as Jose and Jean told the investigating officers that security systems would have caught whatever happened and that they'd be able to tell, which external door was open, they still provided nothing concrete as far as footage goes. And they were only able to give the times that the exterior doors were open and how long they stayed open for before they were shut again. So the doors were logged as being open and closed in this order. The front door was open at 1:47 a.m., which is thought to be when Bridget left to go home when her husband got there to pick her up. The next door to open was the balcony door, and it was opened at 1:49 a.m. And then it closed again at 1:50 a.m., which is the time that everybody kind of assumes that Tamla went out to smoke her last cigarette of the night. The balcony door was then opened again at 1:57 a.m. But the balcony door never closes again after it was opened at 1:57 a.m. It doesn't get closed again that night at all. So it was open and then closed and then opened again 7 minutes later, but never shut again. So 7 minutes seems like a pretty normal time, like a pretty normal amount of time to smoke a cigarette. So why would Tamla open the door to go back inside and then leave the door standing open? She wouldn't. So what if Tamla had opened the door and something happened where she was either stunned or taken by surprise and then she died? That would explain why the door had been left open, because Tamla's body was found outside. So that lets us know for sure that she didn't go back inside even after she'd already opened the door for what we can only assume would be her going back inside to call it a night. And also, no one seemed to notice this balcony door left standing open. It was cold outside. You would think that, if nothing else, somebody would have walked by and noticed that it was cracked. Even if it was just, left cracked open, you would think somebody would notice that. But they didn't, so who knows? It almost seems to me like someone either went outside with Tamla and whatever happened, or like someone forced Tamla outside onto the balcony and she wasn't let back inside before something happened. And there was another log on a door being opened in the house that night, and I still could not figure out why or who opened the door this time. And that was the garage door. The garage door was opened at 1:39 a.m. and then closed at 1:40 a.m. and then opened again at 1:40 a.m. but never shut again. So who was in the garage and why? Everyone at the party that night says that Tamla smoked a joint on the porch outside at some point during the night, which we do know because John saw them smoking and got upset. And we also know that because of Tamla's toxicology report, it did show THC in her system. But all of these people at this party, except for one person, claims that they've never even so much as taken one hit of pot, weed, marijuana, whatever you call it. In their whole life. Let's be real now. This is crazy. What are the chances that everybody at this adult sleepover has never smoked pot in their whole life? We've all smoked pot. We were all 14. Come on now. So only one person at this whole damn party was like, yep, I've smoked pot before. But even that I don't buy. They've all had to at least tried it once. Even if they hit it once and hated it, you've still tried it. So I'm calling bullshit on this whole story. For starters, you don't just smoke pot at somebody's house unless you know that they also smoke pot. Or at the very least, you know that they don't mind if you smoke pot. You're not lighting up a doobie on somebody's porch and you not know if they're okay with it or not. You're just not doing that. But this wasn't the only thing that was kind of presented in a way that kind of made people question or side-eye Tamla and her choices. Almost like they all were like, well, she's not here to defend herself, so we can basically say whatever we need to in order to try to make her look bad to get out of our own shitty situations, which is really shitty of them. And all of the party goers from the party that night made it like abundantly clear that Tamla was the only smoker out of the entire group. Like, Jose even said it, I think, 2, maybe 3 times just in the 911 call. Like, they almost harp on the fact that she was the only smoker in the group. We get it. Okay, cool. Let's move on from this. Another thing that doesn't match is that Jean's first claim is that she saw Tamla at about 1 a.m., and that Tamla was asking her to stay up with her and to keep the party going, and Jean was just like, nah, I'm ready for bed, and the next time she recounts the events of the night, it's a little bit different. The next time she recounts the events, John says that the time that she last saw Tamla was at about 1 a.m. and that Tamla told John that she was going to go, have another smoke and that she was going to bed. But the second recounting only matches what Jose says. Well, kinda. He changed his times to match what Jean's story was after the second time she changed it. But after all these different stories, the couple's story finally did match up with one another, which is also just a little bit weird. Tamla's husband, Lee, says that he and Tamla's sons weren't even able to shed one single tear when they went to do the viewing of Tamla's body because the funeral home had caked black shit all over Tamla's body. Lee literally said that it looked like they'd put black shoe polish on Tamla's body, and when Lee confronted him about why she looked like she'd been blacked out, they told him that that was to cover any bruising or lacerations. But Lee says that it did not look like his wife in the slightest. Lee actually told him to take that shit off of his wife's skin so that he and his kids could say a proper goodbye to what was left of their mom and wife. Like they'd rather remember her with some bruising and lacerations than to have the last memory of her be nothing close to what she looked like in real life. But, okay, even with all this weird shit, the changing of the stories, the lingering questions, Tamla's case was officially closed on February 20th, 2019. It was closed, still ruled as an accidental death, and the cause of death was still listed as multiple blunt force injuries. But how do you get multiple blunt force injuries from one fall? I don't get that whatsoever. And before Tamla's case was closed, Jean's boyfriend, Jose, who remember was a pre-trial court officer, he got caught looking into things about this case, and he was looking into things that he wasn't supposed to be accessing. Jose had opened Tamla's incident report file on November 7th, which was just days after Tamla had been found dead in his girlfriend's backyard. That same file was accessed again on November 20th. Now, he couldn't make changes to the incident report, so maybe he was just being nosy, but he also could have been looking to see, what all the police knew at this point that he didn't know. Because you would have to look at both sides just to go through all the possibilities that he'd be looking into this incident report that he was actually involved in. So essentially, Jose had been snooping, trying to figure out, I guess what the police knew as far as where they were at this point in the investigation. Jose was also looking into a woman named Michelle, and Michelle was one of Tamla's best friends. But Michelle wasn't exactly thrilled with how the investigation went, and she took to Facebook to let it be known. Michelle actually made more than 10 Facebook posts about the details of the night that Tamla passed away. She used all the women's names that were there at the party with Tamla, and she basically called all of them out on how many times their stories had changed and how nothing added up and made sense with how Tamla died. Michelle also publicly posted about how she thought the investigation was shoddy at best. And this was the woman that Jose was looking into. Jose was fired for accessing these files and the information in this case, although no legal action was ever taken against Jose for what I can only assume is an actual crime. And these posts made by Michelle actually got her sued. All of the women came together, all the women that had been at the party, came together to sue Michelle because of the Facebook post. They sued Michelle, claiming that she had caused irreparable damage to their character and their reputation. That's not all that Michelle claims that these soccer moms did, though. She also says that aside from them, all suing her, that they had threatened her and she had been unjustly arrested more than once since then. But there was another, public official that had to be removed from Tamla's case aside from just Jose for being nosy. That was an officer by the name of Mike Christian, and he was also removed from this case for sharing sensitive information about Tamla's case and even pictures of Tamla's case to girls that he was dating. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, like, I would probably date somebody to get confidential case information, but most people aren't as weird as me, and that's probably not how that normally works. So, luckily for us, these women that he was sharing these pictures and information with were like, hey, this is kind of messed up. This is someone's wife and mom, and you're just like willy-nilly sending it and giving it to us. So they reported Mike for this, thank God. But instead of just like taking it like a man and owning his shit and being accountable, Mike didn't give the department time to fire him because he went ahead and resigned from his job. Which is probably a good thing because once Mike resigned, it was rumored that he and another coworker were like blatantly racist and that they were known for treating people of color unfairly or at the very least differently than they treated most white people. So that leads me to my next question. If there had been a party with all black people and one white person attended and this one white person was found dead, what are the odds that this case would be closed almost immediately and ruled as an accidental death? I'll tell you the odds. They're slim to none. I feel like this case would have been handled so much differently had all the races been reversed. There's not a chance in hell that a house full of black people would have been let go and half-assly investigated if this had been one white woman in a house full of black people that had been found dead. That's coming from me, a white woman. I know for a fact that is not how this would have been handled and if this case had been reversed. And I hate to say it, but it's true. Like, they would have never just let this go. And that really, really pisses me off. So before I wrap this up, I want to go over a few of the interviews of some of the people that were at Jean's house for the slumber party, because they're going to make you scratch your head and be like, what the hell's going on in Georgia? So it was weeks, whole ass weeks after Tamla's death that the investigating officers met all the people that had been at this party. They met them at Jean's house to take their official statement. So not only did they wait weeks to get everybody's official statement, they didn't have everybody meet at the police station. They just met at Jean's house to do their statements. So during these official statements and questioning, Jean comes into the room and interrupts her Aunt Madeline's interview. And Jean tells the officers that she had gotten all the officers that were investigating the case gift cards to Dunkin' Donuts. But that someone had told her that it may look bad if she gave the officers gifts before the investigation was over. Which, what is going on in this town? Yes, that would be hella inappropriate. That would be a bribe, and yet here we are. So after she told the officers that she wasn't going to literally bribe them, she then asked the officer something along the lines of, do you need me or can I start getting ready for this funeral? And the officer tells her, go ahead, do your thing. I'm sorry, ma'am, this funeral? I get that she may not have been your best friend, but at the very least you were acquaintances and she did pass away at your house, at your birthday party. I don't care if it's the pizza delivery man. I'd want to know what happened if somebody died at my house. And I didn't write this down, and I could be mistaken, but I don't think I am. The officer that was doing the interviews with Jean's Aunt Madeline was Officer Mike Christian, the same Officer Mike Christian that had to resign from his job for giving sensitive information and crime scene pictures to his girlfriends who turned him in. So that's good, because obviously we should all collectively feel good about him being the one that took everybody's statement at someone's literal house. I cannot with this case. I cannot. The stories change yet again. And during John's statement, she claims that her Aunt Madeline usually went outside to see what the weather was going to be like that day, and that's exactly what she did this morning too. So Madeline went outside and saw Tamla, went back inside, prayed to the good Lord above, then washed her face, went back outside to see if she was tripping and seeing shit or not, and then that's when Madeline went up to wake up her and Jose. What? So let's all remember, Jean's aunt did not say anything about washing her face. Madeline also didn't say anything about going outside, much less going outside twice. Madeline said that she was making coffee. She saw Tamla through the window laying in the yard. But when you hear Jean tell it, Madeline went outside twice, washed her face, prayed, and then went and woke John and Jose up. All while she's still not been outside yet. Do you see why nothing in this case makes sense? Because this story just keeps changing and then changing and then changing again. Jean doesn't remember what door she used to walk outside with Jose and her Aunt Madeline. Jean said that she dialed 911 and then handed the phone to Jose to talk to 911, but that also isn't true because we just all heard it. Jean was the one that had been talking to the 911 dispatcher first, and then later on during the calls when she handed Jose the phone. So the statements and interviews are all this strange, and I could probably go on for days and days about things that don't line up in this case, and things that got changed and twisted again and again, and things that the investigators botched in this case, but I won't. I did link all the statements and interviews below in the show notes. If y'all have time, please go listen to those, because there is no way for me to relay to you how weird half of this shit is. Like, it's just off the wall. I will say that this case has gotten the attention of some of the biggest A-list celebrities just because of how wild it is and how there was virtually no real investigation done. During the Black Lives Matter movement, celebrities like Kim Kardashian and 50 Cent were speaking out publicly about how badly this case needed to be reopened and reinvestigated. And it must have worked, because Tamla's case was finally reopened on June 5th in 2020. There was a second independent autopsy done, and during this autopsy, it was found that some of Tamla's injuries were made post-mortem. So some of her injuries were made after she was already dead, which again does not make sense. And I know I've said it a few times, and I keep harping on the fact that they didn't take any pictures during their first autopsy, but they did actually take 5, which is reportedly an extremely unusually low number of pictures for any autopsy. So, I mean, they did take a few, like, so they could say that they took them and so they could probably cover their own asses, but they didn't take them because it was their job to document their findings. Tamla's family attorney released a letter that he'd written to the family, and he made it public. And during that, he said that someone would have had to have given a direct order to not take pictures during that autopsy because it was completely unheard of. Tamla's family and friends do not believe that she tripped, or they don't believe that she even managed for her entire body to go over the balcony railing. And they still very much believe that even though this may not have been an intentional murder, that someone knows more than they're letting on, and that someone knows exactly what happened. This case is a prime example of white privilege, and if you're white and you don't think that white privilege exists, you're wrong. You're dead ass wrong, and I stand by that. This case is, there's so many times the stories change, and there's so many shady-ass people involved or investigating this case. It is reopened, but I don't know that we'll ever, actually know what happened to Tamla, and I don't know that her family and friends will ever get the justice that she deserves, or the justice that they deserve. But now that I'm all red-faced and my blood pressure's up because I'm pissed, I guess that's enough for this week. I will update with any update. I'll keep you guys updated on anything that I see. But this case, I just can't with this case. It's too much. It's like you know something happened, but there's no way to know what. You know something shady happened, but what? And how are all these soccer moms keeping their, stories? That's the thing, though. Their stories don't even match up. The investigators just didn't do their jobs. I feel like if they pressed these moms even the slightest, one of them would crack. One of these moms is not built for prison life, and it'll show. But until we get pressure on them, they're not saying anything. They're not going to change their narrative. Why would they? Right now, somebody's gotten away with murder is what it seems like to me. Allegedly. Supposedly. Of course. I think that is all I have for you this week. So, go follow the social medias at murdered_mama on everything except Facebook, because on Facebook you can just search Mama Murdered a Podcast, and there we are. And, what else am I supposed to say? Don't forget to rate, review, share, send it to a friend, do all the stuff. I know you know the stuff you need to do. I really appreciate it. So, let's do it again. Same time, same place. Next Wednesday. See you then.
That's how my mama murdered a podcast.